You may recall the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. What was it? The armistice. And on this day, more in Britain than Ireland, it is remembered solemnly, lest we forget. We can take it for granted, but history could have been otherwise. It's the month of November, and as in the case of those two terrible wars, everyone was conscious of death. So too, we need to be aware. We need in November to take stock. We are on the frontier of aeons. It is pause. I took up again this morning this manuscript over which I spent months in quiet translation years ago in enclosure in France, and two passages helped me, and I'd like to share them with you. Another year gone into eternity. Thus do they pass, one after another. Day succeeds day, until the one that puts a term to this short life on earth and begins the long life of eternity. Now this applies to each of us, no matter what our age. Make good use of every moment you have. Each one of them can win you heaven and, notice, spare you purgatory. Each of your actions carried out beneath the regard of Jesus, and this always comes through in the manuscript, interiority and the presence of God, and purity of intention, all for you, and I disappear. All this will give you one more degree of glory in heaven, and at the same time, one more degree of love for Jesus, increased in proportion. Now it all comes down to love. The great bypass, at least the shortener of purgatory. Now, I had in school days and college days a great friend who was now an Anglican clergyman, the son of the Vicar of Cardiff. I used to spend lots and lots and lots of time with him, all kinds of discussions, but often theological. He spent 6 years at Oxford and he was brilliant, but he couldn't quite come over. He was close to it, but he didn't come over to the Catholic Church. And one question that puzzled him was this question of the non-revealed, he thought, question of purgatory. Well, actually, our faith is logical. Take away purgatory and we're in an awful mess one moment after death. Do you think, honestly, that we're ready to face full-on the brilliance of eternity and of the Godhead that inhabits it? I tell you, no. Probably each of us will have a good fry. But we don't have to. And there are means of avoiding it. One I mentioned is great charity. Don't ever, until you die, hurt. Give warmth and heal. Don't cause pain. And the instrument from which pain comes is very small. It's this, the tongue. The tongue can sway eternity. I know two cases where it possibly did. One was in the Spanish Civil War, around 1936. The communist forces were trying to make people apostatize, and they were sometimes succeeding. They got this poor Catholic believer against the wall with a pistol to his head, got him to deny his faith or we'll shoot you immediately. He had a moment of just perplexity, and he went along with their desire. And then, satanically, they said, now we know you're going straight to hell, we'll shoot you all the same. And that word of his, wherever he may be, is still there in the air. Earlier in time, in the Great War, the First World War, someone from our area in Wales, a Welsh speaker, This was told by a witness, not the loudspeaker. He was 22, and he was there in the trenches, and they were being briefed by their sergeant. Now remember, have no mercy. Use your bayonet. The man before you is your enemy. And this young Welshman, innocent as he was, dared to say, "But how can he be my enemy? I never even saw his face." "What did you say?" And immediately he was court-martialed, and out of insubordination, they put him against the wheel of a cannon and shot him. But he went, at the age of 22, yes, as a martyr of charity in the midst of earthly hell. The trenches were hell on earth and close to it. But these little flickers of light show that heaven was aware. And do you know that there were signs that heaven was aware? Do you know what happened when, in the first push, they nearly took Paris, which belonged to Our Lady, and she intervened? They were within a few kilometres of Paris, and she appeared on the clouds like this. To the Germans, thus far and no further. And to the French, retreat no further. It was commanded to be kept secret by the German forces, but one day, in a military hospital, 2 wounded German soldiers were there, and they were talking in a language that they thought no one understood. They didn't understand that the actual nurse who was looking after them understood German and not just French, and she overheard what they were saying. In this hospital was a statue of Our Lady, and she heard them say this to one to the other: "That's the one we saw. It's exactly the same." And in the Second World War, the soldiers were briefed. There will be no miracle of the madman. It's known as the miracle of the madman, when the whole course of history was changed by Our Lady. One of the secrets of the war. I get back to where I landed. I mentioned that one, 22, who in a short innings conquered eternity with a word of love. "So you believe," says the souls in purgatory, or this soul was talking, the other was trying to help out of there, a nun of course. "Do you, that a large number of prayers, or what is more, well recited, will put a soul almost immediately in possession of eternal bliss? Such is not the case. Who can fathom God's judgments? Who can comprehend the purity that He requires of the soul before He admits it to participation in His eternal happiness?" Now remember, the angels also were not given the fullness of beatific vision at creation of their race without this test. You know what happened? Therefore, the demands of entering into beatific vision is actually tremendous. Alas, if people only reflected on these things while yet on earth, what a life they would lead. Examine seriously how many venial sins, it's only a venial sin. Some people come to confession saying mentally, "Oh, it's only a venial sin, I can commit it and get absolution." Now, be careful. Each venial sin is a wound in the heart of your beloved. You don't put daggers in your beloved's heart. It doesn't work in love. As between spouses, you don't do that. If you do, the quality of the marriage goes straight down. And it has consequences because one becomes then not aware. And the conscience, when it's not listened to, becomes hardened and can actually almost, not quite, switch off. Hence mortal sin. Examine, therefore, seriously how many venial sins a negligent person, one who is little concerned for his salvation and is well glued to the earth, commits in one day. Now think, people, Catholics, Christians can go from one monk to the other, repeatedly using bad words, repeatedly calumniating other people. These things which are never ever handled, only when you'll sin. How many minutes does he give to God? Does he as much as think of him with reflection? Think hard. Contemplate 365 days of this kind in 1 year. And if a large number of years follow the same pattern, this person dies with the soul loaded with a multitude of venial sins, which haven't been effaced because the thought never came to him. It goes on to talk about souls, therefore, that just have enough to get there. Just enough. But it's all depending on purgatory. And she insists on the number of souls out there, she means Catholics, who are doing just that very thing. You have, she says, before you all these almost worthless lives which have to be lived all over again in expiation, lives devoid of love of God. And then she goes on to what the consequences are, and insists it didn't take advantage of divine mercy upon earth. It was a slave to its body. Once in the place of purifying, it has to make satisfaction right down to the last night. And on it goes. And these things, my friends, are what matters in this month of the Holy Souls, because they can't help themselves. One charismatic person I know well was shown in purgatory, and he told me this: all I could see was hands. Those are the hands that are crying out, help! One little practice that can help them and you, us because we can think of time and life passing, and them because it's actually indulgence. It's every hour that you hear the hour strike, eternal rest, grant to them, O Lord, let perpetual light shine upon them. May they rest in peace. Amen. It's indulgence. Now add those over a whole life, it's a lot of souls you've helped. I just finished with what happened, I think 2018, not too far from here. I had very good friends. They used to come sometimes on a Sunday evening and end the day in prayer with me. And they've been here actually, one more than the other, because I eventually married them. Now Catherine Griffin, as she was then, she was one of the first ones to come to me regularly for confession. Regularly for confession! And that Sunday evening, they were just in the car, and they came out onto the main Kells Road that links Navan to Kells, and 1 inch would have been enough to spare her life. But she didn't make it. And her husband, who has profound faith, still comes to me, had a great grace to accept this. And he said this, which I've never forgotten, which I leave with you. Catherine always lived in a state of preparedness.